The moment destiny whispers back, ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life when the world goes quiet. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything inside you is tired. Tired of the struggle, tired of pushing, tired of hoping. And in that moment, quitting seems so easy, almost reasonable. Have you ever been there? Standing at the edge of your own giving up, wondering if anything you've done has meant anything at all? I have. And I want to begin tonight by telling you a short story, one that changed the way I look at perseverance forever. Many years ago, I knew a young man, bright eyes, big dreams, big heart, but life didn't treat him kindly. He worked hard, prayed hard, tried everything he knew, but nothing seemed to break for him. Then one night, in a small room with dim lights and a heavy soul, he whispered 5 words, "Maybe this is not for me." And that night, with tears no one saw and exhaustion no one understood, he nearly walked away from the dream he once believed God had planted inside him. But here's the twist: 2 months later, an opportunity came. A door he had no idea even existed. And that door didn't just open, it changed his entire destiny. It elevated him, healed him, lifted his family, and sparked a purpose that would touch millions. And one day, looking back at that night of weakness, he finally understood. Destiny doesn't reveal itself at the beginning. Destiny reveals itself at the breaking point, the moment you almost quit. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey through 7 deep truths, 7 inner chapters of the human spirit, 7 reasons why life sometimes breaks you before it blesses you, and 7 revelations you only receive after you choose not to quit. Each chapter tonight is not a point on a list, but a doorway, a moment, a revelation that unfolds inside a person when they stand at the edge of quitting yet choose, even weakly, to keep going. Let us begin this journey together. When you didn't quit, you discovered who you really are. There is a moment in every person's journey when life stops being theoretical and becomes painfully real. It is the moment when the path you thought would be smooth turns into a battlefield, when the dream you believed would be applauded becomes something you must defend alone, and when the strength you thought you had is no longer enough. That moment, when quitting whispers in your ear and giving up looks like relief, is the moment destiny quietly watches you. Because that moment is not there to break you, it's there to reveal you. When you didn't quit, when you refused to surrender, even while trembling, something extraordinary happened inside you. You met yourself in a way you never had before. Most people live their entire lives never discovering who they really are. They know the personality they show the world. They know the version of themselves that smiles politely, that nods in conversation, that performs well when things are easy and the road is clear. But that surface level self is not the real you. The real you is the one who shows up when everything comfortable disappears. The real you emerges when you are pushed to the edge, when you feel alone, when resources are scarce, when the applause fades, and when the fear is louder than your confidence. The real you is not found in success. The real you is found in survival. When you didn't quit, even though quitting seemed justified, you crossed a threshold of identity. You discovered that weakness is not the opposite of strength. Weakness is the doorway to strength. You discovered that courage is not loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, shaking, whispering through tears. Try again. You discovered that resilience is not something you are born with. It is something you build each time you choose to rise after falling. You discovered that character is not what you show people. Character is what you show yourself in the dark moments, when no one is watching. Think about the nights you felt broken, the mornings you woke up tired, the days you questioned whether anything would ever change. Think about the moments when disappointment piled on disappointment, when people you trusted walked away, when opportunities collapsed, when progress reversed, when you felt like life had singled you out for hardship. In those moments, you had every reason to give up. You had every excuse to walk away, and yet, you continued. Somehow, you pushed through. Maybe you didn't run. Maybe you didn't even walk. Maybe all you could do was crawl, but you moved forward anyway. That is strength most people will never understand. When you didn't quit, you learned something powerful. You are not fragile. You only thought you were. You are not easily defeated. You only believed you were. Life had to bring you to the edge so you could discover that the edge was not your limit. It was your beginning. That breaking point you feared was not the place where you ended. It was the place where your real self stepped forward. And destiny always requires the real you, not the pretending you, not the convenient you, not the comfortable you. The real you is the version that destiny can trust. You also discovered that pain is not your enemy. Pain is a revealer. Pain removes the masks you wear for the world. Pain exposes your truth, not to shame you, but to strengthen you. When you didn't quit, you learned that the voice inside you is more powerful than the pressure around you. You learned that your heart can break and still beat. You learned that your spirit can bend and still rise. You learned that your hope can shrink to a thread and still pull you through. And here is the most beautiful part. When you didn't quit, you discovered that the limits you believed in were lies. The fears you thought would destroy you did not. The failures you thought were final were not. The setbacks you thought defined you did not. Every time you kept going, you proved something to yourself. Something destiny already knew. You were always stronger than you thought. You were always more capable than you believed. You were always meant to rise, even if the world expected you to fall. The world never gets to decide who you are. Only you do. And when you didn't quit, you made that decision. You discovered your endurance. You discovered your depth. You discovered your inner fire. You discovered a version of yourself that is brave, grounded, unshakable, and destined. And that discovery is the foundation upon which every breakthrough, every transformation, and every chapter of your future will be built. When you didn't quit, life started teaching you in ways comfort never could. There is a kind of education that no school can offer, no certificate can validate, and no classroom can contain. It is the education life gives only to those who refuse to quit. The truth is, comfort never teaches you anything. Comfort makes you feel safe, but it does not make you grow. Comfort makes you feel satisfied, but it does not make you strong. If you look back at the moments in your life when you became wiser, deeper, more disciplined, more aware, you will notice something. Those qualities didn't come from the days when everything was easy. They came from the days when everything felt heavy. Growth was not shaped in your victories, it was shaped in your struggles. And when you didn't quit, you stepped into life's most transformative classroom. There were seasons when you felt like life was punishing you, but later you realized it was educating you. It taught you things you never asked to learn, but desperately needed for the destiny ahead. You learned that walls are not always barriers. Sometimes they are mirrors forcing you to face the truth about your habits, your choices, your mindset, and your maturity. When everything went wrong, life was not attacking you. It was correcting you, shaping you, sharpening you, and preparing you. Think about the times you felt delayed. You prayed for breakthrough, but what you experienced was waiting. And in that waiting, you learned patience. Not the soft patience that looks pretty on paper, but the gritty, quiet patience that teaches you to breathe through disappointment. You learned that impatience destroys blessings, but patience builds foundations. You learned that the right thing at the wrong time can still break you. And sometimes the delay was not denial, it was protection. Life also taught you discipline. Not because you wanted it, but because you needed it. When you kept going with little results, you developed a muscle most people never build. The ability to stay consistent without applause. You learned how to push yourself without being pushed by others. You learned how to keep showing up even when no one noticed. That discipline became the backbone of your future success. It became the structure that destiny could trust. It became the quiet force that would later separate you from the people who quit early. You also learned humility, the kind that only pain can teach. You learned that you are not in control of everything, and sometimes the greatest strength is surrendering your timeline. Humility taught you to stop comparing your journey to others. It taught you to honor your process, even when it looked slow. It taught you to release your pride and embrace your humanity. And with that humility came gratitude. Gratitude not only for what you gained, but for what you survived. And then came perspective. Oh, how powerful perspective is. When you didn't quit, life taught you that the situation you thought was ruining you was actually redirecting you. You learned that failure was not the end, it was instruction. You learned that rejection was not humiliation, it was alignment. You learned that loss was not punishment, it was preparation. You began to see life not as a series of attacks, but as a series of lessons. And that shift in perspective changed everything. It made you wiser. It made you calmer. It made you unshakable when storms came, because you had been trained by storms before. Life also taught you to trust. Trust not only in yourself, but in the timing of your journey. You learned that everything has its appointed season, and no amount of worry could speed it up or slow it down. You learned that destiny does not panic when you panic. Destiny does not rush because you rush. Destiny knows what it is doing. And when you didn't quit, you finally aligned yourself with that rhythm. You stopped forcing things and began flowing with them. You stopped trying to control everything and started trusting the higher orchestration guiding your steps. And perhaps the most profound lesson life taught you was resilience. The resilience that comes only from repeatedly standing up after falling down. You discovered that your capacity to rise was far greater than the weight of the things that tried to break you. You learned that strength is not measured by how much you avoid difficulty, but by how well you endure it. You learned that every struggle carried something inside it. Wisdom, strength, clarity, direction. And that quitting would have robbed you of those treasures. When you didn't quit, you unlocked life's highest level of teaching. Not the teaching that fills your mind, but the teaching that transforms your spirit. You learned truths you could never unlearn. You gained wisdom you could never lose. You became someone who no longer fears difficulty, because difficulty has already refined you. Life became your teacher. Pain became your coach. Persistence became your mentor. And now, because you didn't quit, you stand with a depth that only the trained soul possesses. You are not the same person who entered the storm. You are wiser. You are stronger. You are ready. When you didn't quit, invisible seeds kept growing, even when you saw nothing. One of the hardest battles a human being will ever face is continuing to believe when nothing seems to be happening. It is easy to stay motivated when progress is visible, when doors open, when support arrives, when results show. But the true test of your spirit came in the seasons when your effort produced silence. You planted, but nothing sprouted. You watered, but the ground stayed dry. You prayed, but heaven felt quiet. You worked hard, yet everything around you appeared unmoved. In those seasons, it was tempting to believe nothing was happening, that your efforts were wasted, that destiny had passed you by. But when you didn't quit, something extraordinary was taking place beneath the surface. Something you could not see, but something that was real, alive, and growing. Life often operates like a seed buried in the soil. You cannot see what is happening underground. You cannot measure its progress. You cannot observe its expansion. But that does not mean nothing is taking place. In hidden places, roots are forming. In darkness, structure is developing. In silence, strength is being built. The seed does not rise immediately, it prepares, it strengthens, it expands. And often the longest stage of growth is the stage you cannot see at all. When you continued, even in the invisible seasons, You proved you trusted the process more than the appearance. Every prayer you whispered, every action you took, every step you forced your tired soul to make, none of it was wasted. Every bit of it sank deep into the soil of your future. You were sowing seeds without knowing when they would rise. You were building a foundation without knowing how high the structure would go. You were shaping a destiny without seeing the evidence yet. Invisible does not mean inactive. Silence does not mean stillness. Waiting does not mean wasting. When you didn't quit, you gave those seeds time to germinate, time to strengthen, time to break open, time to evolve. You see, the invisible seasons are where destiny does its best work. Because if everything sprouted instantly, you would never develop patience. If everything bloomed quickly, you would never develop depth. If every result arrived immediately, you would never grow roots. The roots are the most important part of any tree, yet they are never seen. They form in silence, expand underground, and hold the weight of the entire future. And that is exactly what was happening to you. While you were frustrated by the silence, life was building your roots. While you were disappointed by the delays, destiny was forming your foundation. While you were questioning your progress was quietly preparing for its reveal. There were moments when you felt overlooked, moments when you questioned your worth, moments when others seemed to advance while you remained stuck. But what you did not realize was that your growth required more time, more pressure, more preparation. Some seeds take longer because their calling is greater. Some seeds remain underground longer because their branches will one day stretch much farther. Some seeds break later because they are destined to bloom stronger. You are not being delayed, you are being developed. Think of the times you said to yourself, "Why is nothing changing?" And yet, without your awareness, everything was changing. The opportunity you needed was moving towards you. The right people were being prepared. The right environment was being shaped. The right timing was being aligned. Destiny was expanding its hands around your future. Even while you felt stuck in the present, you were in a season of invisible alignment, where nothing looked different, yet everything was being rearranged for your favor. When you didn't quit, you allowed the unseen work to continue. You honored the process. You trusted the journey. And because of that, the seeds of your effort kept growing. Every time you woke up and pushed forward, the roots grew deeper. Every time you held on to hope, the soil enriched. Every time you chose courage instead of surrender, the inner structure expanded. You were not walking through an empty season. You were walking through a planting season. And here is the part destiny loves to reveal later. When the breakthrough finally comes, it does not appear in proportion to what you saw. It appears in proportion to what you planted. The harvest is always greater than the seed. The bloom is always bigger than the root. The reward is always louder than the struggle. And all of it happens because you refused to walk away during the season, when everything seemed invisible. You didn't quit. You stayed. You believed. You kept showing up when there was nothing to show. And because of that, the seeds kept growing, quietly, faithfully, powerfully, waiting for the moment you would finally see what had been developing all along. That moment is closer than you think. When you didn't quit, you proved that your faith was stronger than your fear. There is a point in every journey when fear becomes louder than reason. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of repeating the same painful cycles, fear of losing time, fear of not being good enough. Fear is a powerful storyteller, and when life becomes uncertain, fear begins to speak with authority. It tells you to turn back. It tells you to shrink. It tells you that you are foolish for believing in something so uncertain. It tries to convince you that safety lies in surrender, and that quitting is wiser than continuing. But in those moments, something deeper inside you whispered louder than fear, something that refused to die, and that was your faith. Faith is not a feeling. Faith is not excitement. Faith is not that burst of energy you feel in the beginning of a dream. That is enthusiasm. True faith reveals itself when enthusiasm dies, when circumstances contradict your hope, when the path becomes foggy, when nothing makes sense. True faith is born in contradiction. It is forged in uncertainty. It is proven in darkness. And when you didn't quit, you demonstrated a faith far greater than the fear that tried to paralyze you. You see, fear is loud, but fear is temporary. It rises quickly and fades quickly. What sustains a dream is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to submit to it. You continued even when fear told you that continuing was pointless. You breathed through anxiety. You moved through doubt. You stepped forward at times when your hands were shaking. That is not weakness. That is faith in motion. Most people misunderstand faith. Faith is not standing strong because you feel strong. Faith is standing strong even when you feel like collapsing. Faith is choosing to rise, not because you see the path clearly, but because you trust the step you're taking. Faith is walking into the unknown with no guarantee, except the conviction inside your heart. And when you didn't quit, you lived out that conviction. Think of the moments when fear painted the worst case scenarios in your mind. It showed you failure. It showed you embarrassment. It showed you loss. But fear never shows the truth. Fear is a storyteller that exaggerates danger and minimizes possibility. Yet in those same moments, your faith reminded you, I have survived worse. I have overcome before. I have strength left in me. That voice was not always loud, but it was always true. And because you listened, your faith became stronger than your fear. Faith does not eliminate fear, it overpowers it. Fear says, what if you fail? Faith says, what if you grow? Fear says, what if this hurts? Faith says, what if this heals you? Fear says, what if you lose? Faith says, what if you win? Fear says, what if this dream isn't meant for you? Faith says, what if this is exactly what you were born for? You didn't quit because you allowed faith to answer the questions fear asked. Every time you pushed through fear, something powerful happened inside you. You expanded your spiritual strength. Fear shrinks the soul, but faith stretches it. Fear makes you smaller, but faith makes you larger on the inside. Fear closes doors, but faith walks you through them. Fear demands certainty before it moves, but faith moves even without certainty. And by not quitting, you allowed faith to shape your character. There were days when your fear disguised itself as logic or reason or caution. Fear often comes wearing the mask of wisdom. It says, be realistic, when it actually means, stop trying. It says, protect yourself, when it actually means, don't risk anything. It says, you should know better, when it actually means, you should be scared. But you learned something profound in this journey. Fear protects the past, but faith protects the future. Fear keeps you safe where you are, but faith moves you toward where destiny needs you to be. And here is the beautiful truth. Each time you acted in faith, even in small ways, life responded. Maybe not immediately, maybe not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, steadily. Doors began to crack open, clarity began to return, strength began to rise. Not because everything was easy, but because everything in you refused to surrender to fear. You showed fear that you were willing to feel uncomfortable in order to grow. You showed fear that you were willing to walk into the unknown in order to fulfill your purpose. You showed fear that it was no longer the authority in your life, and destiny took note. When you didn't quit, you proved something not only to yourself, but to life itself, that your faith was stronger than any obstacle, stronger than any doubt, stronger than any setback, stronger than the storm, stronger than the silence. You kept walking even while afraid, and that made you unstoppable. That made you powerful. That made you ready for every blessing fear once tried to steal from you. When you didn't quit, you outgrew the limits that once controlled you. There comes a point in every journey when the person you used to be is no longer capable of carrying the destiny you are growing into. Your old habits, your old thinking, your old fears, your old excuses, your old routines. None of them have the strength to hold the life you are becoming. And many times, the struggle you went through was not a punishment, but a transformation chamber. It was life's way of stretching you, breaking you open, reshaping you, and preparing you to become someone far stronger, far wiser, and far more capable than you ever believed possible. When you didn't quit, even in moments where everything felt too heavy, you started outgrowing the limits that once controlled you. We all begin our journey with invisible boundaries inside us. Boundaries shaped by childhood, by past failures, by painful memories, by negative voices, by the environments we grew up in. Boundaries that tell us, this is who you are. This is all you can be. Don't dream too big. Don't try too hard. Don't expect too much. These limits often live inside without our awareness. They blend so deeply into our identity that we mistake them for truth. But the moment you chose not to quit, the moment you pushed beyond exhaustion, beyond disappointment, beyond fear, you unknowingly broke the lock on those boundaries. Growth is rarely glamorous. Growth often feels like breaking. It feels like discomfort. It feels like confusion. It feels like being stretched beyond what you think you can handle. When you continued despite the resistance, you were stretching your capacity. You were expanding your strength. You were rewriting what was possible for you. And at some point, the limits that once confined you simply couldn't hold you anymore. They cracked. They dissolved. They lost their power. Think about the challenges you faced. Moments when you said, I can't take this. And yet you did. Moments when you believed, I don't have anything left. But somehow you kept moving. Moments when you thought, this is too much for me. But you survived anyway. Every one of those moments was proof that your old limits were no longer accurate. The challenge didn't expose your weakness. It exposed your capacity. It showed you that you could handle more than your fears believed, more than your doubts assumed, more than your past experiences suggested. People often think the battle is external: money, opportunity, circumstances, timing. But the real battle is internal. The real battle is the fight between who you used to be and who you're becoming. And by not quitting, you consistently chose your becoming. You chose growth over comfort. You chose evolution over stagnation. You chose transformation over familiarity. And that is how a person rises. Life has a way of putting pressure on you not to destroy you, but to expand you. Pressure reveals strength that comfort conceals. Pressure builds qualities comfort never touches. When you felt overwhelmed, life was expanding your emotional endurance. When you felt afraid, life was expanding your courage. When you felt uncertain, life was expanding your faith. When you felt alone, life was expanding your independence. When you felt defeated, life was expanding your resilience. Every struggle stretched the borders of who you were, making room for who you needed to become. At some point, you began doing things your old self never thought possible. You endured storms your old self would have collapsed under. You carried responsibilities your old self wasn't strong enough to lift. You made decisions your old self wasn't wise enough to make. You trusted yourself in ways your old self didn't know how to. That is what happens when you don't quit. You evolve. You rise. You expand. An expansion does something remarkable. It creates a new identity, not an identity built on fear or limitation, but one built on strength, capability, and experience. You stopped seeing yourself as someone who trees, and began seeing yourself as someone who overcomes. You stopped seeing yourself as someone who doubts, and began seeing yourself as someone who adapts. You stopped seeing yourself through your past, and began seeing yourself through your potential. The person you were before the struggle could never carry the blessing waiting on the other side. But the person you became through the struggle, the person shaped, stretched, strengthened by the journey, could. When you didn't quit, You shattered ceilings that once felt unbreakable. You outgrew identities that once felt permanent. You overcame fears that once felt unbeatable. You stepped into a version of yourself that your younger self would not even recognize. Your limits no longer define you. Your history no longer restricts you. Your past no longer traps you. You didn't quit, and because of that, you became someone bigger than your boundaries and stronger than your fears. You are no longer who you were. You are who you decided to become. And destiny can only unfold for people who grow large enough to hold it.